Welcome back to Dortmund Dispatch. Today I'm joined by Jake from 50 Plus Donor, and today we're going to be discussing the long-term prospects of the top five Bundesliga clubs, and we're going to be keeping the 50 Plus Donor moniker of staying unbiased, but we will be discussing Dortmund as a bit of a reference point, but completely unbiased. I won't be spewing any club propaganda. Um, so how are you doing today?
I'm all right. I'm so glad everything's in full season now. We're super excited to just constantly see German soccer on the weekend, so it's very nice.
Yeah, September break definitely a buzzkill this weekend, but we're gonna stay consistent with some content for you guys. Very disappointing. First bit of housekeeping: Gio Reyna's injury seems to be like a relatively minor muscle injury, but again, because of the injury history, just not saying stable. It's always a bit disappointing, especially when the September international window is useless. Except for Liechtenstein losing to San Marino.
Oh yeah, well that everybody's got to remember where they were when that happened, right?
I definitely will for a long, long time. The second win for San Marino in my lifetime. Very happy to have been alive for two San Marino wins. Um, but let's get into it. So we're gonna start with first, and we're gonna work all the way down to fifth with Dortmund because we had a great season last year, finishing in fifth. And let's start talking about the coach. So Leverkusen's coach, obviously, Xabi Alonso, Bundesliga season unbeaten. What do you think? So obviously, I think we're both going to agree he's probably the best coach we're going to talk about today.
Oh yeah. Although I will say I think Sebastian Hoeneß is a little closer than I think people will give him credit for, but it's hard to ignore Xabi Alonso being undefeated. Like we got to give him the top spot there.
Yeah, for sure. I also actually think that Honus has just as good a shout to be that top guy on this list because I think the job he did was a bit more difficult last year. But I think also when you're talking about like the top five clubs, it's different to talk about like the manager because today we're talking about who has the best prospect to win title after title, and how which coach is going to be the most impactful to do that. It's one thing to make £2 million players look like £20 million players. It's another to make like the 30 million they spent on some of their guys and like obviously free transfer, but to make Grimaldo who's probably on a considerable wage for a club of that size, to look like arguably like I think he should be like a top 10 Ballon d'Or finisher this year. Um, and like to get what he's gotten out of Verts, Boniface, like there's another level there, and so I think that Xabi Alonso, in terms of established title contending coaches, I think that gives him a bit more on Honus.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think one of the forgotten parts of Xabi Alonso's experience is was his Real Sociedad. He was the B team coach, so he has direct experience being a head coach for younger players, and I think you can see that in how he handles the young players because they do have a young team. It doesn't seem like it, but they really do. Um, and obviously, what he's able to do to make sure they're developing and still getting meaningful minutes is really important, I think, for this next stage this year for Leverkusen because we don't know how long Xabi's going to be there, but I think if he can set up Leverkusen for long term success, like we're talking about, that would be one of the most important things out of the season.
Yeah, we're going to talk about their young core a little bit later, but I think the most important thing to talk about Leverkusen, because we're talking about long-term prospects today, so it's not this year, it's like not even next year, it's years 3 to 6, and so the most important thing to talk about with Leverkusen in the context of their coach is will he be there in 3 to 6 years? And this is where it kind of gets into a bit of a gray area with Xabi Alonso because obviously he's a disciple, or has at least learned from Jose Mourinho and Pep Guardiola, among some other fantastic coaches. And both of those coaches in particular, you're talking about largely 3 year spells, which would end next year. So I think that there have already been Real Madrid links, but they have Ancelotti, who's a perfect fit for them and also a fantastic manager in his own right. And everyone likes like a shiny new toy, especially in football. These young coaches, like you can look at some of the jobs that were given away to Maresca and company. Um, People like those younger managers, and Xabi Alonso is by far the hottest commodity on the market. So it's
Yeah.
really just, do you think, like, can you give me the odds you think he stays in 3 to 6 years?
I'm gonna say pretty low. I think it was I think it was already super important enough that he came back this season. But like you said, like there's gonna be a lot of a lot of teams willing to fire whoever is in charge of their team currently if it means that he can be there. And I actually kind of want to see him at Leverkusen for the next 3 6 years. But I think for someone that talented and already a crazy resume for on his managerial stamps, um, I think it's be extremely extremely hard.
Yeah, and if you look at some of the signings they kind of brought in this summer, like obviously they brought in Belosian, who we'll talk about more when we talk about the young core of this club, but it's a lot of 27-year-old prime age talents like Alex Garcia and I think it's Terrier.
The Terrier, I think.
My French pronunciation not the best there. Um, but basically, like these guys they're bringing in, it's win now guys, and once he likely he is the favorite this year, even after their first loss. If he wins like a League Cup double at Leverkusen, I think then it's like kind of what else does he have to win? And while we've seen him turn down jobs, like he turned down Gladbach while he was at Real Sociedad B, waiting for that perfect next step. Um, Eventually he's going to have the confidence in his own abilities, having managed a Champions League campaign this season for Leverkusen. I think that's one of the boxes he wants to tick before he moves on. So I really think it's about 70-30 that he's there for year three. And then by years 4 and 5, I think that you're looking at maybe 90-10 he's gone.
Yeah.
Okay, and you talked about how young this Leverkusen squad are. I think that it's gotten a bit overrated because this past year, you look at Flojek leaving, Tella is now. So, first of all, our criteria, just to go over it real quick, goalies and defenders 24 and younger, I'm counting as the young core because then you're looking at essentially 4 to 6 years of prime left, even longer, especially for a goalie. Um, for midfielders, you're looking at um, 23 younger, attackers 23 younger. If it's a defensive midfielder, I'm not sure I have any in here, but I would have gone 24 and younger if there was a defensive midfielder because that's a position that just matures later.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but yeah, so in terms of their young players, they just brought in Kovar from I believe Manchester United. 24-year-old goalie. Herjetsky is their keeper, 34 now, but that is the age that goalies start to decline a little bit. But he's very solid. Bundesliga player for a long time. Hincapie, 22, defender. Belosian, who's come in this summer, 19, defender. Arthur, who's been there for over a year now, has not played too much. Does not necessarily fit the Xabi Alonso system as a traditional attacking right back in a back four out of Brazil. But again, a different coach could come in and see him. He's a very highly rated player, I believe. Then you obviously have Verts and Boniface, and you can't talk enough about Verts' talent.
Yeah, of course.
Although I will say Boniface for me, uh, injuries obviously took away from his campaign last year. He might be my favorite non-Dortmund player to watch.
Oh yeah, well I mean his I feel like his mantra is just shoot it. Like It doesn't matter if it makes no sense to shoot it. He's going to shoot it. And I think because of that, it just opens up ridiculous goals that he's able to put in. So he is very, very fun to watch. That whole team is.
Yeah, the freedom he's allowed to play with too, because he
Yeah.
will just take on anyone in any situation. Like, if I could be any football, like play in any football player's style at the top level, it would be his, because you have some like incredibly intelligent, creative players and whatever that do some things that just like blow your mind. But in terms of just the things that you do that are fun on a pitch, it's Victor Boniface does, because he's starting as a striker. He's big enough to go in the box, like muscle his way in, score headers. He's fast enough that he can get on the end of the back line, but he also just gets to pull out wide whenever like he's bored and just like take a guy on and shoot. He has the freedom to do absolutely anything he wants. But again, we're only talking about five guys, and we're going to talk about some other clubs in a second. I just don't think that they have the same depth we would have been talking about last year with a lot of their young players. Obviously, Stanisic was only a loan,
Mhm.
but you're just talking about Flojek, who could have been or was a high ceiling player that they brought in, didn't necessarily get the minutes. Tella's very good. He's not old by any stretch of the imagination, but Logic is probably a higher ceiling player. Um, and to have him leave and to bring in a 27-year-old for what we're talking about today, all those 27-year-olds are going to be 30 at the kind of window we're talking about. It's not necessarily like the same thing to kind of allow those guys to leave. And even like their defenders, Belosian, very highly rated. I haven't seen him play in real life yet. Tried to sign him on Football Manager, got priced out. Um, his fee in real life was quite a bit lower than what I was getting quoted at. I'll tell you that.
Well, I think one of the things that is kind of missing from this list that I saw just randomly scrolling through Twitter is their U19 team is apparently very, very good. So there's a bunch of people that we don't even know yet. When you are talking about that 3 to 6 years, like that team is supposedly running people over. So I think maybe that's why they let Hologic leave. Because I think for them, anything they could have gotten him, like everybody knows he's a high ceiling player. Like he was never gonna really play it behind Boniface and oh my god, Patrick Schick.
And
Like
Tella as well, because I think he kind of did when he did play. I feel like it was mostly on that left wing.
yeah. So I mean, for them, I don't think it was really a big. I think they're looking at what they do have in their youth leagues, and they're like, but we're not really pressed to keep this guy. But I also think another point is like we're really pumping up Beerts, but I think the time is ticking on him too. And for Leverkusen, I mean, it even though he's going to be one of the best players ever. I feel if you're getting 100 million or whatever in the world that they're getting quoted for what this price is going to be, like you'd be kind of dumb not to. You know what I mean? That is a lot of money for one person that I think they've only seen for Havertz. Probably, I think Havertz probably went close to around there. So you enjoy it while I can, and like I think he's gonna. I think he's doing a lot of PR for like people wanting to join the team, maybe. But I think he's going to be moving on. I would assume pretty soon, but we'll see.
Yeah, we're gonna talk about some of the other young cores later, but I'd kind of have them towards the bottom in terms of I think retaining talent.
Hmm.
I think they, in terms of having young players, having a young core, I think they're bottom. I think in terms of just because Verts is so far clear of a lot of these other guys, and Boniface is just that in demand position, and he has that physical profile and talent that every top club is looking for right now, which is a big striker that can do a bit of everything, that has like the size, has the pace, has the technicality. I just think that the two most important players are probably gonna go from what we have today. But again, like the business they do, they know when to buy the young talent. Like they've been stockpiling young defenders for years. You look at how they handled Leon Bailey to Diaby to Frimpong. Like I definitely have faith that they will continue to buy good players, but you won't constantly hit on every single one. The way they hit on like Diaby to Frimpong to Grimaldo, Boniface, Verts, Palacios too. Like you won't have necessarily, I think, if you're Leverkusen, like all these guys that have like the right injury at the right time to allow them to not hit the peak until you make the next two signings. They are perfect, and Palacios is now fit and firing and looking at one of the best midfielders in the world. So I just think in terms of young cores, and what they've had happen, and the best coach in the world last season, I think they're going to be bottom for me in terms of young core. That's just me.
I would put them in the middle, because like I think when you talk about young cores, I think it's not just the senior team. But what I will say is
we're talking about the academy next. I will say so.
But if we're talking about people who are already on the team, then yeah, I don't really see them. I think maybe Kovar will be there a while because goalkeeper's just it's kind of hard to.
And they just brought him in, so he'll be there for a long time, and especially like at his age, I think he's a player that should be easy to keep for 8 to 10 years, if they choose to.
Yeah, so I think if we're talking about retention, yeah, I would say they're probably towards the bottom.
And let's get into the academy. So I did look up when you said that they've been running over people. They beat Borussia Dortmund's U19s on penalties. Their only goal was scored in the 81st minute by a 17-year-old center back. Dortmund's team is very, very young. It's almost entirely U17 players. Their starting striker is 17. Their starting winger 17. Their other starting winger 17. Tyler Meiser 17. Musa Kaba's 15. Their starting striker was 15. Like Dortmund's U19s have essentially been turned over. They have half a U19 side, kind of with the U23s, which is something we'll talk about later. Whereas I don't know the ages for the Leverkusen U19s. I've heard good things about a couple of their players, but I'm not studying them the way I am Dortmund. So if you're telling me that, I will say that. But what I will say is, if you're looking at the top end academy talents produced, Dortmund and Bayern have consistently produced top end talents because their academy recruitment is very good, and it's very easy to have that academy recruitment when you have consistent success in the Champions League. But in terms of top end academy players, you're looking at Verts, Havertz, Benny Henrichs, Dominic Kord, Danny DaCosta, Christoph Kramer, like so many like top guys. They don't produce at the numbers of a Dortmund or Bayern Munich in terms of guys that are on 100 appearances in the Bundesliga, but their top end guys are somehow still there. So it's really about quality. Like they always find a star in every like 5 to 6 years. Maybe even you want to go 4 years. So I definitely have their academy pretty high on this list.
Well, Wirtz is a asterisk because really he came from Köln, and then I think he went for 100,000.
The way I sorted the academy players was the player had to have played for the U19s. So that includes like every club signs like 16-year-olds for their academy. Like half the guys I mentioned that are like 17-year-olds playing for Dortmund's U19 team, like these guys have been signed from all over the world. So like one of their older U19 players is from AIK's academy. They have another from Las Palmas. They have another from Atalanta's. They have another from Schalke's. They have another guy from Poland, a guy from LA Galaxy. Like once you're getting into the top like U19 teams of any top team in Europe, nowadays that's just what it is. Like you're signing guys from other teams, U16 teams, because you have a little bit more wealth and you can give them the same kind of like, as soon as you're physically ready you'll be integrated in our team, or you'll be out on loan for a year and then in our senior team. So that's just the way I think academy recruitment has gone recently, especially like if you look at Man City, like not all those guys are from Manchester. They're from all over the world. That's what it was. So credit to Colton's Academy. There's a couple guys on this list that have spent time in Colton's Academy. Um, but I just wanted to put that out there in terms of giving Leverkusen credit because I think they're a comfortable third. And I think there's a big gap between fourth and fifth. For me, just because I think the quantity what we're going to talk about later for Dortmund and Bayern,
I think their academy, if we're talking about people who already came from there, might be towards the bottom for me, but I don't think that's going to be the case forever. I think with their U19 doing better, we're starting to hear about their academy team, which there's probably Leverkusen fans who definitely know better than I am, but
definitely better than me too.
Right. I haven't really heard about their academy all that much. And the fact that we're hearing that now, I think maybe if we did this in 3 years, we might be saying something different. But for right now, I think they're probably towards the bottom for me.
Yeah. Again, I think it's 1 and 2 are very close. I think distant third, and then I think it's marginally distant fourth, and then it's a very, very distant fifth. But we'll get into that later. So overall, I think their prospects are very good, but we're gonna wait till the end to rank everyone. Next, we have Stuttgart, Sebastian Hoeneß. We already talked up him a lot in terms of a Bundesliga manager, top of the line. So, do you think he lasts beyond this summer?
That's a good question. I think maybe out of all the clubs we're about to talk about today, I think he has the best chance to just be there. I don't think there's really. I think Stuttgart is just constantly a good project anyway. Like from year to year, there's always something different. So I think in terms of if we're talking about like people who get a thrill out of the coaching aspect of it instead of like the prestige, like this is one of the best places to be at. But I guess it depends. Like, if they do well in Champions League and then all of a sudden people start calling, like, it's going to be hard to... I think anybody in the top 5, right, is going to be hard to kind of keep, especially if you're Stuttgart. But I still think he has the ability to stay there. I think out of all the coaches here, I think he has the best chance of staying the longest.
I think he signed a new contract this summer. That kind of points to me that he's going to be there 2 to 3 years. So I actually think that he has a much higher likelihood of staying for the majority of the time period that we're talking about, which is 3 to 5 years, than anyone else, because I think he'll be there for years 3 and 4. I think they do get Champions League football this year, whether that's 4th or 5th. I think Germany's, especially off like the very excellent campaign they had this past year, I think that they'll probably maintain that spot, that 5th spot. So I think that he should be able to not necessarily have a good Champions League campaign, but do well enough in the league to maintain their Champions League status. And I think that honestly matters more to a club like Stuttgart. And in terms of like the long-term structure of the club, if he achieves that and then a club comes in that he can't turn down and that's willing to pay his fee, you're going to be looking at a Stuttgart that are in a different world financially, because the current Champions League TV deal with the expanded amount of games and stuff, as much as like there's issues with that, it would put a club like Stuttgart on par with like a relegation side in like the Premier League in terms of money, which for the Bundesliga is like basically the Infinity Stones. Like if you look at the recruitment this year, like some of the guys that we're about to get into, it's genuinely absurd. That like to think that 2 to 3 years ago Stuttgart are signing some of these guys. So I think that he's honestly second best coach. I think it's straight away there. I think let's get into the young core unless you have him as the third coach, which I doubt.
No, I
But
would say second as well.
okay. So this is their young core. Dennis Seaman is the only youth team player I have put on any of the young core lists. He's listed on the senior team. He'll probably travel with them at some point. He may make his debut against a weaker, like pot four type Champions League side. This guy is talked about at another level. Like their German youth goalkeeping prospects that have been talked about at a very high degree in the second tier this season. But Dennis Seaman is like the guy of German youth national team goalies. He has a very big frame, I think. It looks like he has broad shoulders, which is something that like lends yourself to having a big wingspan, which is something you would want as a goalie. So I don't know a ton about him, haven't seen his film, but he's very highly rated, so we threw him on here. He is still a teenager, so a million different things could happen. But he's one of the most highly rated goalkeeping prospects in the world right now.
Yeah.
So then let's get into the defenders. You have Sergio, who's out of St. Gallen now. I can't pronounce the Austrian.
Yeah,
Huh?
I'm pretty sure it's Gallon, right?
It's spelled Gallen, I believe.
It might be Gallon then.
He's 22. Rouault is 23, out of France, from I believe Toulouse. You have Al Dakil from Burnley, who is 22, and you have Henri Chase, who is 20, Japanese American center back, who's already gotten first team appearances this season. I don't know how many of those he'll be taking up as Al Dakil kind of settles in to Germany and starts to get accustomed to the squad and gets acclimated to playing for Stuttgart and Sabonis' system. The midfield, one of the best players we have on this list, it's Angelo Stiller, 23 years old, which is still pre-prime for a defensive midfielder. So he should be getting better somehow, even though he is very, very good. You have Enzo Mio, who's very good, French U21 international, the French U21 international team is basically like better than most senior teams.
Yeah.
So to be one of those guys
he's super underrated too. He played
incredible.
He did a lot. He did very good last year too when they were doing their rise. So
yeah. And the last two guys we have, I believe it's Justin Deal at 19. I believe German, maybe American. There's, oh my god, I might be confusing him with the Cologne player, Damian Downs. I think they might both have some American. I don't remember. And then it's Voltamata, formerly of Werder Bremen, who came over on a free. So I think when you have four defenders like that, that are that young, like you can't sell all of them in one summer. Like it's never gonna happen. So some of these guys are gonna have extensions, and I think that's like very, very, very good. Like that's something we would have talked about Leverkusen before they had Xabi Alonso. Like the hope for them was they had like 4 or 5 center backs who were probably gonna be really good.
I think the big thing with Stuttgart, though, which is I think their eternal problem, is they really are just basically a dinner plate for other clubs. Like, as soon as someone starts doing well, like, I mean, their captains, like, no matter what the age, their captain, they haven't had a consistent captain, like, in a very long time. Like, there's something about Stuttgart where people just kind of, like, think that's the testing ground. So they have an incredible young core. Like, I think the potential in all of that is very good. But if we're talking about retention, just something Stuttgart had a lot of problems with. I don't know if Champions League will maybe change that or something like that, where players are like, okay, I can actually get like big minutes here in a lot of different competitions. Like, if they do that consistently,
I don't think it's about the minutes. I think it's about the wages. And so you can kind of talk, like I saw quotes just because Dortmund bought half their team, and were linked to the other half. Basically, I saw a lot of the quotes, basically from their backroom staff, essentially saying that our hands were tied. There were a lot of release clauses and a lot of guys with not that many years left on their contracts. And so if you're kind of looking at that, you can he kind of also talked about getting rid of those release clauses in the contracts. And when you sign a bunch of guys after finishing like around the relegation playoff, you're gonna have to put in a lot of those release clauses to attract guys. Whereas now, when you're in the Champions League, you don't necessarily have to do that. So I think that bodes well for the retention, or their player retention. They sold a lot of guys, so even though they did spend pretty significantly for them, I think they should still have some money to kind of tick up the wage bill. And then if they hit Champions League again, they can kind of tick up the wage bill again, and that's how you start to retain players. The issue for Stuttgart is if they don't get Champions League football this year, that wage bill is going to have to stay kind of where it is, and that's where your point about player retention, in my opinion, becomes like very prevalent.
Yeah, and I mean, I think if we're talking about money, also off the field, Stuttgart has like 1 billion partnerships. Like they got a ton of money from Porsche and Benz and all these other places. So they are wheeling and dealing. Which, like to your point, yeah, like I think in terms of money, they're trying to get there where they can do the retention. But okay.
Champions League bonuses will also really help out when you already have like, if you have higher end sponsorships, like they're going to be bargain sponsorships for the corporations right now. But once you get in the Champions League and it comes time to renegotiate, all of a sudden, your renegotiation standpoint is going to be so much higher because your jersey is going to be basically going on tour in front of millions of people. And your club profile gets bigger, so you get more international fans. They're starting to have like a consistent kind of Japanese player, the way Dortmund has had an American player. And the Japanese football isn't as big as Japanese baseball, but like when you get a kind of player, you're kind of able to corner the market. Essentially, if you get like a big enough player, and they haven't necessarily had that in terms of Japanese players yet. I don't know if there's like a Japanese superstar that's had that, but the closer you can get, or even just having a consistent Japanese player, you're going to start to get more and more Japanese fans, and that is something commercially as well that will allow them to retain players a lot better.
And they also have 1 billion fans. I always say, like spiders, you're never more than 7 foot from one. So I swear they are everywhere. It's a really crazy fan base. But yeah, like you're saying, like international profile is going to be big, and like that's going to work for them. But if like the higher you go, the harder you'll fall. Like they really do have to keep that up because 1 year's just not enough to sustain what we're talking about. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and even if they let's say they finish fifth, and the Bundesliga doesn't get the fifth spot, then they only get Europa League football, which is more money than it was last year.
Right, yeah.
But it would really hurt them more than anyone else. Like, as much as it saved Dortmund, like this year, if Dortmund miss out on Champions League for 1 year, they have the brand and the commercial standpoint and have been well run for the last 15, 20 years that they have the money in the bank to kind of stomach that for a season. Stuttgart don't. It would have to be made up by sales. And if you're selling a player a year too early, it's like selling Apple stock right before it like exploded or whatever. So you don't want to sell these guys before you're forced to. And when you're forced to, you want to make sure that's at the highest like possible value. Not to take a dig at Schalke, but you don't want Goretzka leaving on a free, or any of the other many players that left on free transfers from that club. Like you want to avoid that. You want to avoid a Nico Schlotterbeck 1 year deal selling for like sub 20 million, and then 2 years later he's the best center back in the world, arguably. So that's my worry for them.
Not to play to the crowd, but yeah, you want to avoid being Schalke.
So yeah, I think that it's very easy for them to hit on, like I could very easily see 3 to 5 of these guys having either been sold for so much money that it doesn't matter they lost them, or having been so good for the club and still being there and still being very very good, like top five league, Champions League level type talents. Um, so I kind of would almost put them on par with Leverkusen. I think that like Leverkusen's external transfers will be better because historically they've recruited very well in that higher tier, like more expensive, more highly regarded type of young prospect player, where Stuttgart haven't had the money to even attempt that yet. So I think that Leverkusen would be better in terms of recruiting and matching the level. But I think in terms of the players at the club right now, I think that the Stuttgart young core is better. I think that if we're talking like the next, we have to remember 3 to 5 years is what we're talking about. So I think the young core right now is better. I think the core of the team at Leverkusen is obviously far superior, but the young core at Stuttgart I think is genuinely really really good.
Yeah, and I think like since we're talking about volume, right? Like that is like 9 players, 8 players that can be considered your young core. So even if you lose one or two of them, you still have 6 more players that are extremely talented and young. If we talk quality, yeah, I think they are really up there. I would say third, and I think the top 3 in my brain are really, or top 4 in my brain are really close together. But I think with retention, I think it's just like we are saying, like we've been talking about. I think it's just hard to say right now. Like I think
Yeah,
this year is going to really affect whatever that is after.
absolutely. But also the other thing in terms of retention, if they hit Champions League football, they have 4 center backs. One gets poached. I talked about. I don't know for a fact. Their board said no more release clauses. Let's say this season it's Rouault because he's 23. He enters his prime. Um, he gets sold for a boatload of money. Okay, you already have 3 guys at the club. So now instead of buying a 20 million pound defender to replace the 40 million pound one you sold, you're buying a 5 to 10 million pound prospect. Henri Chase is now like a step up. El Dakiel is a step up. Sturgi is a step up. Um, so I think that in terms of defenders, they have so much like young
Yeah.
depth and young quality depth. But now let's get into the academy. They have no one in the first team with 100 first team, or they don't have anyone right now with 100 Bundesliga appearances under the age of 28. Historically, they have Stoger, Werner, Ronnie Khedira, Rudiger. But again, you're going to see a lot of the ages of these guys. It's 28 and over, so it's been a while since they've produced a high end player. And even in terms of like high end, we're talking about like Ronnie Khedira level is included in that list because they don't have a ton of other guys, and so they haven't really produced anyone of note from their academy in quite some time.
Well, I wouldn't say that. I think there are some people like I think Serge Gnabry is also in there. Um,
He
I think
spent some
he
time. He spent some time in the Arsenal academy. But he didn't. He was not on the list. I think that I saw. Maybe he's like 29th. I don't think he's 29-30. So he might not have come up for me.
he definitely played in their academy at some point. I think like it's hard to nail down because there was an age like kind of around here where they all of their players like in this caliber kind of left and went elsewhere, which is why I was saying earlier that like just historically it's been hard for them to keep people. Um, I think as I was talking about with who they have on their roster right now, I don't think they're really concerned about where like someone making 100 teams appearances. I think they have these really good prospects. I think they view themselves as a place for prospects to kind of get their feet under them and get some great experience and some money while they're at it. Um, I don't think that's really a knock on their academy at all. I think they they feel that they're in a good place with that. So I kind of gotta honor that. I think it sucks that they haven't been able to like keep any of these guys or that these people. Um, well, they are kind of big names, right? Like Kevin Sturger, we all know.
Yeah,
He,
I think you were correct. Serge Gnabry was there. He was 29. He was probably on like the next transfer marks
yeah,
page, and I just missed him. So my apologies for that. But again, I think that it's a bit of an issue when you have to like we're talking about sustainable approaches right now, and it's definitely a knock on you to not be able to, like, some of these guys obviously played for their academy. They had a golden generation clearly for like 28 years ago. The kids being born were all going to Stuttgart and becoming fantastic footballers, because you're talking about like 6 7 guys in one generation um who are either like top Bundesliga players like Stoger, or you have Werner, Rudiger, Gnabry, who are all elite German international players. So I think they get a ton of credit there, but when it's been a little while since you've had academy success, obviously like they're finding some free transfer guys um, from like the Unite team level, or even U23, U21 level, like Voltamata and Deal. I think Voltamata was almost, if they had missed out on Champions League football, I think he would be playing a much bigger role this season. Like if they'd finished sixth, or if they'd finished even fifth and Dortmund hadn't done well enough to get the Bundesliga the fifth spot, like this guy might be like shoehorned in. Now he's not. So financially, they've been able to take a bunch of very cheap gambles on up and coming players, but it's still a knock on their sustainability to not have had a top level like academy player, even like have your academy produce like a regular Bundesliga player. Because even if he doesn't play for your club, you can still sell him on. You still get like certain bonuses every time he makes a transfer in terms of like solidarity payments that can kind of add up.
um, I guess I don't know because they still have some like I'm thinking what Benedict Hollerback also spent some time
Yeah,
there and Kevin Sessa. I don't know. I think you're right in that they
yeah,
seem
they
like
have guys that will hit 100 Bundesliga appearances in their career for sure. But when we go into the next, or two of the next three clubs, we're going to be talking about like a laundry list of guys.
Yeah, that's fair.
And so I think they're fourth. I think they're worse than Leverkusen. I'm not saying they're terrible. I'm not saying they're shit. But that's like, I think they're a distant fourth when we're talking about the top five Bundesliga clubs. And fifth is going to be like, it'd be bottom for the second Bundesliga. I'll put it that way.
Yeah, now that I scroll down, I concede my point. The
Fair.
next two, yeah, they bury him. All right, never mind.
Yeah, so let's go into it. So third place last year was FC Bayern Munich. Their
Crazy
head.
to say. That is crazy to say that they were
There's a big
third,
smile on my face right now.
third place.
Yeah, so their head coach is Vincent Company. I'm gonna step away for half a second to turn my lights on because the sun has gone down. But Jake, tell me what you think about Vincent Company.
I think we all know. I think this is one of the biggest gambles that Bayern has taken in a very, very long time. I would say even more than oh man, who was at Frankfurt and then they took him. But this is one of their biggest gambles I think in a while. I never would think that Bayern would take the coach of a team that like was relegated. But here they are, and I I don't know. I want him to do well, but I don't know how this is going to work out. I think if we talk about coaches in the top five, he definitely is bottom of the five. Like, I don't think he just has the proven ability to like be in that top level yet. But we'll see this year. I mean, sometimes people rise to the challenge. Like, he's obviously a legendary player, so he knows kind of like the pressure of a big club. So I think people don't give him enough in that, and like I think he can navigate that very well. But in terms of just straight up
Thierry Henry
coaching,
was at a very big club, and
but I think like that wasn't he didn't know the pressure. I think he's just
yeah,
not a good coach.
I think that Vincent Company, like from well, I've seen a lot more Vincent Company. I was a little young for Thierry Henry. Vincent Company was a very, very intelligent player. Even after his physic, like he was a beast physically in his prime, but even after that went, he was still a very smart player. And you could see that from his positioning and all that. Um, so I definitely give him some there. But for a Bayern coach, like we're gonna talk about Dortmund and Nuri Sahi not necessarily having the experience and getting the job again, like Vincent Company, because he was a top player and had played for Borussia Dortmund, whatever, whatever. He had 2.5 seasons essentially um, managing in Turkey in a top flight league, combining players from all over the world into a first team squad. And Vincent Company's had a lot of experience combining different nationalities, which I think is a big positive at Burnley, which is not something you would have thought of like 5 years ago, a la Sean Dyche. But like Vincent Company did that. He got the team to gel, but it's the championship. And if you're looking at the teams that have dominated the championship over the last, I'd say, 5 years, um, it's been a recently relegated side that's been playing possession football, that's kind of copy paste possession football from a various top side around Europe, and they steamroll the championship because they're going up against championship sides that are fighting to stay above water and get promoted while not accumulating too much debt, and a lot of them fail at that. So I think that the championship is a very difficult place to manage, but you're not necessarily managing against 24 sides. You're managing against three, and I think his campaign, like Sheffield United, he was managing against. Was literally in such financial disarray their club would have been like dissolved essentially if they didn't win promotion and then they signed in no one. So like they didn't have the financial might to spend with Burnley. So I think there's a bit there that's kind of an asterisk on that experience. But I do think that he has the potential, but it's like you said, it's kind of hit or miss.
Yeah, I mean, I think like still when we're talking about championship, I would love to look this up, but I'm sure they have very similar finances to some of the top, like maybe not like a Leverkusen or something like that, but maybe a Bremen or something. So I think that he'd be at home there. I just wonder how, like you were saying, championship experience will go into Champions League and all these other competitions that Bayern didn't do well in last year all of a sudden, right? They want to get back to that, obviously. And they're going with a coach that has that experience as a player, but maybe not as a coach. So maybe the potential's there. Maybe they kind of struck gold, but I think it's just going to be an insanely tough job for him.
Yeah, and it kind of goes into kind of what I said about Sebastian Hoeneß earlier, where it's very different to make like a £5 million player look like a £20 million player, which I will say, Company has done. He's developed a lot of young players. He's allowed Burnley to sell on a ton of young players, like Wilson Odobert. He's gotten, oh my God, the young American Italian winger into the Italian national team set up a little bit. Amin Al-Dakil, he's gotten into Champions League football. He took Tella from a loan move to um, a Champions League side now, who was a big part of Leverkusen last season. So he's developed players at that level, but it's very different. Like, can he get Jamal Musiala back to his best, back to the campaign we saw 2 years ago? Can we see him get the best out of Harry Kane? Can we see him get a consistent campaign out of Serge Gnabry, out of Leroy Sané? Like, making those guys with their reputations look like 50 to 80 million pound players is very different from what we're talking about with like getting a project player to kind of hit their potential. Like, these are very different things, and you can't have a hiccup. And, like, obviously, Burnley didn't have any really hiccups in the championship. And there's a lot of parallels you could draw to, like, the financial advantages I talked about and Bayern's financial advantages. But to do so at a higher level is a very different task.
Right.
Um, I'd make an argument for him in fourth. I would not make an argument for him in third. And I think that one and two, again, it's like a big gap for third.
I'm gonna put him at the bottom because I think 1, 2, 3, and 4 for me are very, very close. But I just like coaching at Burnley and coaching at Bayern are two completely different things, and it's not against. I just don't have the kind of evidence that I see with the other four.
He certainly does not have the resume, but we could be looking at in 3 years that he's all of a sudden in that Xabi Alonso talk that we were at the beginning of the episode. Because
I also wonder if Bayern doesn't do well this year, what that will do. Because I think the coaches are like we. I think the.
I don't even think it would be his fault.
But
I think the
board,
recruitment's.
I think their board is super impatient. Like I think you saw that with their transfer window this year.
I think their transfer window was poor. I think that there's a very real world in which they finish a distant second, and the board sacks him immediately, and company will have done a fantastic job. Yeah. Because again, like Harry Kane gets injured, like are we giving Tell, 2,000 league minutes for the first time? Like he's gonna have to play from the start. He's been excellent off the bench. Starting is a whole different animal. And replacing Harry Kane output is like kind of like impossible to ask any 19-year-old to do. That's not like Messi. Like we're talking about Messi and Mbappe, maybe like Lamine Yamal levels for a 19-year-old. There's only so many of those guys each generation, and Barcelona will do their best to hurt 50% of them. The other 50%, like, do not grow on trees. They probably don't have one in Tell. He will probably be a very good player. He probably isn't ready to replace Harry Kane if he gets injured. Harry Kane's had a lot of injuries. Yeah. So their squad is very poorly constructed, I think, for the level of financial, like the type of financial advantage they have is just, it's kind of embarrassing, like what their board's kind of put together. Oh, yeah. But let's talk about some of the good work their board has done with their young core. I'll put Company in fifth, like you had. So midfield, they have Pavlovic at 20, and in their attack, they have Musiala and Tell, 21-19. So this is the fewest amount of young core players we have seen by far. I think they might have like the two best prospects on the list in Musiala and Pavlovic. I think the only better player we're going to talk about today is Florian Wirtz. In terms of like midfield, attacking midfield players. They have a ton of guys in their second team, in their U19s, that are supposed to be the next big thing. But with a lot of top academies, they have a lot of players that kind of dominate, especially with their second teams, just because you have like a salary of 10 million going up against like regional league guys. That's what they should do. And then when they have to start going up against better athletes, better players, some of them get exposed, and then the true stars stand out. So I think that like when you see guys put the potential on Twitter, and Bayern have like 29 out of 10s, like half of those guys are probably going to be like lower first league players somewhere. They're not going to hit on these guys. That's just the nature of it. Dortmund is the same way. It's about having as many of those types of players as you have. And we'll talk about that a bit more in their academy. But 3 players, that's their whole young core. No one in defense is particularly young. Stanisic, I think, just missed out. He might be 24, so I might have been mistaken to have missed him out or left him off this list. But either way, you're looking at a very low number of players.
Yeah, I mean, they have just going over their starting lineup, they have a very much older team, which is weird to think about since I think a lot of the people that Bayern thinks about, of like starting Schweinsteiger when he's 18 and that kind of stuff, their academy just kind of shifted a little bit. They have in the defense, they still have Davies, who's 23, which blows
Wait,
my
what?
mind. He feels like. That's what I thought.
I skipped over him. I thought I just missed Stanisic.
My whole life. Um,
I mean, he made his debut for Vancouver when I was, oh my god, when I was 16.
yeah, I feel like he's been playing my entire life, but yeah, I mean they have this older team. I think the players that they're kind of hoping is their young core are currently playing somewhere else, or like you said in that second team, like Paul Vonner is probably that guy to watch right now with Heidenheim. But I mean, this is kind of not for me all that encouraging. There's a few players that it's like, okay, they might turn out well, like you were saying, but normally I think with Bayern you could look at a young core or a young player that they do have and be like, yeah, that's the guy. We have to see. Like, I wonder if Bayern's going to put that focus back in there in making youth players kind of like stand out in the first team, but in terms of young core with like the rest of the teams, I think they are, yeah, definitely at the lowest, even though they do have the most talented young core. Just in terms of numbers, like we were talking about with Stuttgart, like if one leaves, you still have 8 other young players that you can kind of like build and keep going. Where like if Musiala leaves, then you just have Tell and Pavlovic, and if they leave, then who do you have left? So
And Davies is linked away on a free.
yeah, he gets in a rumor every month it seems.
Yeah. I hope for like he's had some mental health issues. I know. He's had some bad behaviors off the pitch. Don't know why he would do Jordan Huitema like that, but she's clearly doing fine. Julio Rodriguez, gorgeous individual. But anyway, back to the football side. They did lose a couple academy players on some transfers this year. A guy you didn't even mention is going to be playing some Champions League football this year at left back. So maybe their left back replacements for free in Kratzig, who is currently at Stuttgart. We didn't talk about him as part of the young core because obviously just a loan. I don't know if they have an option to buy. Vidovic, who I said is a Croatian attacking midfielder who's fairly highly rated, but not one of their like top guys. I think he's left for like sub 5 mil this summer. Loan with an option to buy, I think. I could be wrong. But yeah, I think like the depth in their attack, like Tell, we haven't seen start yet. He's still so young. He has so much time, but he could be the guy. He could not be.
I changed my opinion. I'm looking at the roster. Like some of these guys I didn't even realize were so young, like Sacha Boey. They got Olise. Like
Sacha Boey's 24 and hasn't looked incredible.
But I mean, like
Elise is 24, and like outside of a hot stretch at the end of last season, you're talking about like sub 10 top flight goals and around 100 appearances. So it's like, which player are you getting? Are you getting the potential Elise has, or are you getting like the player he was for the first like half of his career at Crystal Palace? So again, it's just like there's so many like unknowns there. I think also just because a guy's in the Premier League, did I really mess up the list this bad? I did. Wow. That's unlike me. I'm very sorry. To Bayern Munich, I tried to rig it against you.
You can't remember every player. Come on, give your.
I was reading off Transfermarkt, and I guess I just like kind of didn't see the ages. But Olise again, it's just like I gotta pull up FBref just to go over this. But like at the end of last year, Crystal Palace went on like a 10-game like winning run where they won every game, and he scored about like I think 6 or 8 of his 10 goals and got a couple more assists in that run. Obviously, like if you're looking at the whole course of a season, he's going to end up with some crazy numbers. But again, I think it was like a bit of an injury hit campaign. Obviously, just 21, plenty of room to grow, but that purple patch is a bit worrying when you're like analyzing a player. When like the year before, it's like 13 goal contributions out of like almost 3,000 minutes. That's pretty good. That's not like setting the world on fire. Um, that's like he was like like 2 seasons ago he was a sub point 0.4 goal per expected goal per assist per 90, and then last year jumped to 0.74 off a hot streak at the end of the campaign, but before that was not necessarily there. Is this the breakout or is that a run of form? This season so far 132 minutes, he's at point 0.7 in a much better side, and so it looks like he's made that step up finally, which you would start to expect at 22. So I think they have the high end guys, and I think Olise is also an example of like Bayern's young core doesn't matter because they can just go out and spend whenever they want to.
Well, I think like something that kind of goes to what we're saying here is like these are the only prospects we really have like nailed down some stats and like you talked about the most, because they just have the higher expectations out of anyone on this team. So there is more of a pressure for these young players to go. I do think their board is getting away from wanting to have these young players stand out from their academy. Like I think most of this team they bought. But yeah, I mean, I wonder. I would put this young core like I think under the expectations are so much different than any other team on here, but I just think in thinking of all the young prospects I've seen across Bayern's years, I have to say that it's kind of one of the lower ones if you exclude Musiala and Tell, obviously.
I will say they like what kind of Real Madrid did to build this team, where they bought Camavinga 16, they bought Vinicius Jr. 16. Bayern got Davies at 16. They bought Musiala at 16. They bought Tell at 16. And when you're Bayern Munich, you can kind of afford the 20 million on Davies. You can afford the obviously Musiala very cheap, but you can afford the huge outlay on Tell. And then you go to Australia and you get like Nestori and Kanduka for 1 million, whatever, who looks incredibly rapid, good ball striking ability. Can he put it together? Can he dribble? Are kind of the questions I haven't seen. I haven't seen a ton of him play, obviously, because he's 18. He's playing in the regional league with their second team. So he could be a guy. And they've kind of shown that they have that model of buying a 16-year-old. And if it works for Real Madrid, it could very well work for Bayern Munich. And that is, like, fortunately and unfortunately, the way modern football's going. Like, you need a bit of that. And they can afford to take those more expensive gambles and buy the best prospect at a given age. But I think that you are right. Like, it has gotten away. And I think that when the kids come up from, like, the region and the academy, even if it's not the region, if they're just playing like U14, U15s, and then they go all the way up to the senior team, I think it's an extra level. Because if you look at one of the things that you could criticize about them last year is, aside from Thomas Muller, I don't know who the guys fighting for the badge were. Like, it's a lot of guys that are on big wages that are trying to perform their best as professionals. And in German soccer, it can create a very poisonous atmosphere at a club when you have professionals rather than guys who are like fighting for the badge, in my opinion.
And I think that just goes against Bayern's history. I mean, say what you want about Bayern, but they have people fighting for that badge usually.
I think that was honestly the best bar I've ever dropped on this podcast. So I think that overall in the young core, it's after you discovered my errors, my reading errors, my research errors. Oh my god, worst I've ever done in terms of research. I think it's hard to get away from second. I think even with Davies leaving on free, like you can't criticize Bayern's finances because they're such a robust structure that as long as they're not overspending, which it's very difficult for them to do, they'll be fine. In terms of like, they just have the financial muscle to allow Davies to leave on a free. Like, there are not a lot of clubs that can do that. Bayern can. So like, yes, it's not the best thing to do, but like, if they have to go and pay him $1 trillion a year next year, they can just do that. When he's on the open market. If he goes and leaves on a free and they have to replace him, whether it's Kretzig or whether it's like whoever the most expensive guy on the market that Vincent Company likes, they can do that. So I'm not really worried about them from that standpoint. I think in terms of a young core, we're talking second or third here. We put Leverkusen third. I think I almost want to go. I'd go tied third, I guess.
Yeah, I'd put them around there too.
I just think Wirtz is. I think he's clear of Musiala, and everything else doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Let's go over to their academy now. So Wu Young Jung, Marco Friedel, Musiala spent some times in their U19. Same with Stanisic, Angelo Stiller, who we just talked about. Over at Stuttgart, spent some time in their below their U19 level. Same with Pavlovic, and you already talked about Paul Vanner, who I think he was at like Elversberg or something last year on loan. 17-year-old. Again, like Bayern innovating a little bit. You haven't seen a ton of like second-tier loans and then first-year loans into the first team. And he started the season very, very hot. I haven't gotten to see him a ton. I did catch the end of Heidenheim's last match, but that was kind of after. I think he got subbed off for like 50% of what I watched. So didn't get to see a ton of him in that one. But again, it's like they just have so many guys that are talented passing through their academy.
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of, since we've talked about the other ones in terms of like longevity, like they're easily one or two. I think Dortmund might. I think they're fighting Dortmund obviously for 1 and 2. Right?
We can wait. We can wait to rank the academy for Bayern until we talk about Dortmund, because I think that the mid-level guys at Dortmund just have so many like mid-level guys pass through the club before you even get to the B team. Like, we're not even talking about like the B team stuff for Dortmund right now. Like, there's so many Champions League level players that pass through the Dortmund like U19s, and so many like mid-table guys. I think Bayern have like a lot of guys in and out that like touch the Bayern academy briefly and end up as Bundesliga players. I think they typically lead for like most Bundesliga players that steps foot in their academy. But I think in terms of like spending time between like 15 and 19, I think Dortmund might be a bit better in that way. I'm not sure how like the Bundesliga quantifies it, but I also know that Dortmund are always up there as well. But they're not next because Leipzig finished fourth last year. Their head coach is Marco Rosa. I am a Marco Rosa hater. I think that Leipzig's finish last year was very overrated because Dortmund were so terrible. But I think you're a bit of fan, not of Leipzig, but of what Leipzig has done this past year.
Clarify that. I don't need more people thinking I'm a Red Bull fan. I just like what they do. I don't condone.
I don't. What's Red Bull? What's Red Bull?
Oh, sorry,
Rosenball.
Oh, excuse me. But no, I am. Like, when we talk about Marco Rosa, I am a little bit of a Marco Rosa appreciator. I think he kind of got the short end of the stick at Dortmund. That year that they fired him in, like, I'm sure you know, almost everybody on the team got injured at some point.
Yeah.
And I think he's just going to take that with Leipzig. I don't know what to make of theirs. I think, like, your point about Dortmund being a little slower last year does make a good point, but I don't think that, like, drastically changes the trajectory of their season. They still would have finished fifth.
Yeah.
I think he has extreme potential. I thought he had extreme potential with Dortmund as well. But I really am a fan of what he's done in the past, and I think once he has more of a grasp and more time at Leipzig, you're going to start to see how good of a manager he is, like for the long term, right? So
Yeah, this is certainly like this campaign and how this year goes for him. It's the biggest like indicator of whether you're right or I'm right. And because this is like we've agreed a little too much, I would have preferred you to have less good opinions. But in this instance, I think you might have one. I think Marco Rosa is fine. I think he's a Champions League, like you want to finish fourth, you guarantee fourth. He's that type of manager. I don't necessarily think he's taking Leipzig back to a Champions League semifinal. Um, I think the best manager they've had to this date is Ralph Hasenhüttl. And I think he got fired very early. I think Marco Rosa, to your point, did get fired too early at Dortmund, and it wasn't his fault. I think also like he wasn't the solution, if that makes sense. Like
right.
Terzic clearly wasn't. He came very close twice, in part because of better recruitment. I would argue like he wasn't bad, but he wasn't good. Um, and Dortmund like have had metrics that kind of are underlying that say they're not a very good side the past 2 years, but they've kind of overperformed all of that. And when you're consistently overperforming that, that just to me shows that there's a lot more quality in the squad than is being gotten out of it. And I think that's kind of the same that you could say under Rosa. Whereas I think Rosa's had a pretty good squad and he's gotten a pretty good amount out of it. I don't think he's ever gotten a side to really overachieve. I would argue his Leipzig side underachieved last year, and I'm not sure they necessarily got better. They have a lot of guys that are very young that are going to be older and better. We're going to talk about in the next section. So I think this year is the make it or break it. Like he needs to be overachieving in some facet, like in one competition. Like he needs to go through like Leverkusen, like two of Leverkusen, Stuttgart, Dortmund, Bayern. Like he needs to go through two of those teams in the DFB Pokal. He needs to like outpace a couple sides and get like a convincing good third place finish or better in the league. He needs to or go on a Champions League run. Like put on a close display in a Champions League semifinal. I just don't think he's necessarily had that like crowning achievement since coming to the Bundesliga. I don't think his time in Dortmund was like the best opportunity for that. And I don't think that I just don't love him and what he's put together. I think that he to me is fourth.
Oh, my goodness! I wouldn't put him all the way down there.
Because Nuri Sahin has potential. I think Nuri Sahin has spent 2.5 seasons getting a side to achieve at its level in Turkey, and I think he's come to Dortmund last year and gotten a side that was hapless in possession to look very good after the winter break, while confined to a terrible system. I think that the idea that Nuri Sahin could be good is more enticing than the fact that Marco Rosa is okay.
I don't think he's an okay manager. I think he's very good. And I'm going to say something that is going to sound a bit like a conspiracy theory. I think Leipzig really doesn't care if they win the league or not.
Oh, they don't. That's not a conspiracy theory.
Which I think Marco Rosa is the perfect coach for that. He's just competitive enough for them to consistently finish top 5. He's just perfect enough for them to be competitive in the Pokal. He's just good enough to be competitive in Champions League. And I think when you're Leipzig and you're looking long term, they're trying to build that base that Bayern has and Dortmund has of just being, you have 20 plus years of championship paychecks so that they can hit that next level. So I don't think they're really pressed about like Marco Rosa not being a championship winning coach.
But that goes to my point. It's that he's
But
fine. It's not.
I don't think he's fourth out of the five.
I think that when you're talking about like Sebastian Hoeneß has like overachieved. I think that Nuri Sahin has achieved at his level and done very good work as an assistant and could be very good and has like kind of the idea of having played for that captures a bit more appreciation from superstars. So I think he commands respect in a way that Marco Rosa cannot without a crowning achievement. And until Marco Rosa gets that crowning achievement, to me, it's hard to set them as kind of equals.
Yeah, but I think if I'm gonna knock
I will say the floor of Rosa is higher than the floor of Sahin, but I also think the ceiling of Shaheen's higher than the ceiling of Rosa.
right, because he's a relatively new coach, right? So I mean, you could say that for a lot of younger coaches.
Their age isn't that different. Like Marco Rosa, if like you're looking at he coached at RB Salzburg, Advertising FC, Little. So like us, he coached there for a couple years, and then he's coached in the Bundesliga for 2 to 3 years. So you're only looking at like 1 or 2 more campaigns than Nuri Sahin. I don't think that like 1 or 2 campaigns is like that big a difference. These are still both like young, inexperienced, like fairly inexperienced coaches. Obviously, Rosa is a bit more experienced now, but I don't think these are like fully seasoned guys. Like I think we're talking about how Marco Rosa like this year will find out who you are. I think that like Nuri Sahin next year will find out who you are if you're managing Dortmund. I just don't think they're like. I think that like Rosa's had a bit more experience, but like RB Salzburg's won like the league pretty much every year. Like that's good experience, but it's not like I don't think that's like the best experience, and it's not even like that many more years of experience. Maybe my math is off, but to me it kind of sounds like they're like Rosa was coaching in the Bundesliga the same time Shaheen started in Turkey, pretty much. Might be off by a year.
I can't say an assistant who is just starting a head coaching job is better than someone who has.
He had 2.5 years as a head coach, and a year and a half of that he was also a director of football.
Consistently performed in a Champions League. I just can't put him above that.
Consistently performed? What are we talking about? Like losing in the round of 16?
It's a round of 16.
I think Leipzig Leipzig the year before he started were in the semifinal. No,
right. So what is the highest level that Sahin has gotten as a manager?
As a full time manager, he's finished I think 7th with Antalyaspor, who's like best finish or like average finish historically, or like 9th.
So you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I'm saying that he's gotten a team to finish like at their like highest level, and I think that Rosa has gotten a team to finish almost at their highest level. I think they're 1 and 2. I'm definitely being a little biased here, but I think that like I'd rather have the unknown than have the like known. Okay, because I don't want a guy to be like just like he's probably just good enough. I'd rather have a guy like he could be really good. He could also not necessarily be the best. But this is also having experienced 2 years of like Edin Terzic, where like you have a guy who's clearly not the best, and your side is still able to perform at a higher level. So I'm saying that with the context of being a Dortmund fan, where like the squad can carry the manager to some degree right now. And we never got to see a squad that could carry the manager under Rosa. I think there's not really going to be an agreement here. We could talk about this continuously, but I think we get into the young core for Advertising FC.
I'm going to say there too, easily. The most annoying thing about Leipzig is they're able to just spawn these young players out of nowhere that can start. like,
Well, we talked about Schalke's like financial mismanagement a little bit earlier today, and so one of the ways you can take advantage of that when a club is literally like choking out on the floor is you go and stomp their neck and pay the absolutely minute release clause for like the second highest rated Germany youth international that's on the market right now. That's a U20 player, and that's going to get like Asan Ouedraogo from Schalke, and then you can go and get Van de Voort because you sell like you're on Football Manager and you sell whatever top end player that you just get to like the age of 22. So then you can go and buy Van de Voort. You can go and buy Lukeba. You get Bichiabu because that's what you do. And then Herr Truda falls into your lap at 25 million. Arthur Vermeuren's available at the end of the transfer window. Why not take a punt on him if he plays X amount of games? You get him on the cheap. Seavold not necessarily hit the ground running, but like that's a guy that could be good. He's still only 22. Your midfield is kind of your weak point. So if he's like mediocre, he's gonna help you out a lot at 22, and become good enough by like next year. You go and get like the best U19 or U20 winger on the market. That's not Jan Bakayoko, in Antonio Nusa, and you have Benjamin Sesko, who's probably gonna leave you to go to like Arsenal in the near future, but right now he's really good.
well, I think in terms of quality, they are definitely one or two. In terms of retention, they're definitely at the bottom, and I think Leipzig's
But
okay with that. like they,
they do get good fees, and like when we're talking about retention, like one of our criticisms I think was that Stuttgart were losing guys on release clauses and like not selling guys when they wanted. I think Leipzig have done, unfortunately, a good job of selling guys at the peak of their value.
right. So like I think they're at the bottom of retention, and I think that's where they want to be. Um, as long as they can sell one, two, or three of these guys for some of like 50 million or whatever they usually sell their young guys for, like I don't know.
Yeah,
They're
performances don't matter. So I think I actually am coming around to your point. Like performances don't matter for the club. So yeah, I will say in terms of like retention, like yes, they're always going to be able to sell and buy the next guy, but they're never necessarily going to be, I think, competing for the league titles because regardless, their shirt sponsor will be their shirt sponsor for 34 matches, and they'll get a lot of eyes on them. And they'll always be in and around. So when they play the top sides, all the eyes will see their shirt sponsors, and that's what matters most to them, not retention. So I will say, in terms of retention, I'd agree with you, bottom, but again, second top. For young cores, and I think now we go and we talk about their academy and their do they have an academy? So Martel currently at Köln. He spent some time in the Köln academy, but he also spent some time in the Leipzig academy. And then you have Ermedin Demirovic. I was scrolling for a long time to find a guy that was playing above like the third tier of Germany. You'd be hard pressed to find guys in the second tier. They spent a lot of money on their academy, and it's still terrible. Their big product over the last 4 years, the only guy I heard about while he was still in their academy was Hugo Navoa. I think he's in like the Spanish second tier right now. Demirovic spent a little bit of time there, did not break through there. Has now ended up at Stuttgart for a pretty big fee, so he'll probably be their best academy product ever. Even a guy like Paulson, he did not come through their academy, I believe. I think he was purchased at 19 and never played for the U19s because they were in the third division at the time. So that I did do my research there. Just not the Bayern first team for whatever reason. So yeah, I think their academy is fifth. It's an embarrassment. And it goes into how they have 12 fans or whatever it is.
I think academy depends on what you're referencing. If you're talking about the Leipzig Academy, yeah, it's awful. Like they have just a bunch of, like you said, third league players kind of sprinkle around. But if you view Salzburg as their academy team, then that is a completely different
Oh
conversation.
yeah, then they got Seavold in their first team. They got still
Holland,
kicking around Orban, Holstenberg somewhere.
yeah.
Um,
So like
but
they're
no,
doing
we're
well.
not counting that as their academy. We've been as a show, we try and be very critical of money laundering because it is a crime, and like putting money from your right pocket into your left pocket is not revenue. That's money laundering, and that's kind of what they do. We're as a podcast, we have different hosts, different guests, whatever, all with our own opinions. But the standard opinion for the Dortmund Dispatch, like regular rotation of hosts, is multi-club ownership, not great. So we're not counting Salzburg as their academy, and even then, it's not the. A lot of those players aren't Salzburg academy players. They're either guys Salzburg is signing that are U20s and go straight into the first team, um, or guys Salzburg is signing that are U19s and go into their academy for a year or two, which we kind of talked about earlier, like the difference. But then they would have qualified as academy players in what we're using, but not for this list. They go fifth. This has been a long episode, so let's keep it moving.
Yeah.
And let's talk about Nuri Shaheen. Uh, we already kind of talked about him, so I think we're good here. I think the issues we've seen this season are essentially too many like for like substitutions against Werder Bremen in particular. Like you get to make the like for like substitutions um, when the game's going how you want it to against Eintracht Frankfurt. When Werder Bremen is getting the game to kind of go how they want, and you make like for like substitutions, that's kind of an issue. I think we need to get back to what we saw in preseason, where you're starting three attackers, and if you started an attacker in like all the attacking roles, you're probably going to create more chances. It's not groundbreaking. I'm sure Nuri Shaheen knows this. I think that he hasn't wanted to drop any of the center backs, which I think is okay. I think the guys that need to be dropped are like one of the midfielders needs to be dropped. I think that it probably should be shown against the lower half teams. And you just get a bit more control by having a lot more of the ball, and you don't need the defensiveness in your midfield as much because you have three center backs, and you get the extra attacker on. If you want to keep Emre Can on because he's the club captain and has that defensive ability, I think it'd still be better to drop Sabitzer for an attacker, and then you have an attacker on each wing and a striker, like we saw in much of preseason, and it looked pretty good against Villarreal, good side. Against Aston Villa, good side. Granted, it's preseason. I think we need to get back to that system being employed as it's intended. I think Shaheen's system's good. I think his realization against Bremen, or lack of realization in needing to bring on the extra attacker to get his system to work, that gives me a bit of pause. Um, but we'll see, because I have spent like the last two seasons watching zero substitution football for 75 minutes on a good day and 85 minutes on a bad day, and seeing regular substitutions like at the 60th minute. It's statistically proven these attackers that are coming on with fresh legs are going to perform better, and having a manager that actually like understands that statistically you need to be making a substitution of like for like at the 60th minute, because it's just gonna work every time. Like having that is good.
I'm gonna defer to you on all that.
Okay. So we kind of already talked about your criticisms of Shaheen, so I think we go straight into the young core. Nico Schlotterbeck still qualifies as a defender. He will be far and away the best defender we will have talked about today. He's 24. This is the first year of his prime, which is absolutely wild to say. Guy coming off nearly 4,000 minutes in all competitions, Champions League final run, while being absolutely exposed in a terrible system and somehow still making it work and looking excellent. You also have in defense Jan Koto coming off, I believe it was 10 goal contributions, 8 assists, 2 goals. In midfield, I'm counting Wattien here. There are a couple other teams that have academy players with very few starts that I did not count. So this is a bit of bias. He's planned in the first team and the third team, or second team, third division this year. So we'll see what he offers. There's very few guys that can come and make their debut and play multiple through balls in a game. That's rare. Gio Reyna, good, injured. Will get a lot of minutes this year. I'm seeing people already complaining because he was on the bench for the second league match. Like, you are a moron. There's nowhere Gio Reyna would start that doesn't suck. And if he goes somewhere that sucks and finishes like bottom 6, bottom half in the league, he's not going to look good because he needs to play possession dominant football. Borussia Dortmund play possession dominant football. You're saying like where are his minutes going to come from? I don't know. Marco Reus left. That's 2,000 minutes right there. Jadon Sancho left. That's another like 1,500 minutes right there. Jamie Bino Gittins is going to get more minutes, but like his career high in minutes is 1,000. So you're looking at like him taking up 2,500 minutes. So you're still looking at like Dortmund essentially having 2,000 minutes to fill an attack. Maxi Bayer can help with that, but I don't know if Maxi Bayer is a creative 10. And Nuri Sahin talked about empowering Julian Brandt. Julian Brandt played a lot of minutes last year. And like we'll see what happens this year, but from like every single friendly into every single match, there have been changes from Nuri Sahin, so he will get minutes this year. Have to talk about that. Sorry to our non-American viewers. Our American dominant audience is obsessed. So we got to get that out there. And then in attack, we have Karim Adeyemi, 22 years of age, still very young. Players that can get that many chances in a Champions League final do not grow on trees. Most overhated Borussia Dortmund player. Hopefully will be in for a breakout campaign. Scored 2 goals for the German U21s recently. Jamie Gittins is now 20 years of age. And is being kind of penned in as a starter, not penciled in. Julian Duranville, I believe, made his Belgian senior team debut recently in the last couple days, just 18 years old. Has now been fit for probably the longest period of time since he's been at the club. Scored his first senior Dortmund goal. Had previously only scored for Anderlecht. And still only 18, very bright talent, apparently is faster than Karim Adeyemi. Don't know the context of that. That's our club leaks. It's a little bit better than the Marius Wolf is good at slamming the medicine ball into the ground and having it bounce up as a basketball. And Remy Bensebaini is now in the best shape of his life. But that's kind of what preseason does to you. I'm sorry that I read all those. Well, I hope that I read all those posts so you didn't have to. And then Maxi Bayer has come in for a fairly sizable fee. 21 years of age, did not impress on his debut. But again, I think that's a bit down to system and not playing with 3 attackers on the pitch. And having Julian Brandt do a lot more midfield stuff. So yeah, that's kind of the young core of Dortmund's attack. I just talked way too much. You're going to have to take it over for a little bit.
There is a midfielder that you left off that I hope is not a part of Dortmund's core. But
Nemecha? Yeah. Are we counting him?
He's 23.
I think it's his age 24 season. I don't want to count him. I don't want to think about him. Listen,
he's not there.
If the club gets anything out of him, I think it's good. Whether that's a £20 million fee next summer, whether it's him playing center back for the rest of the season, like he did in our last match, I think anything with him is a bonus. Dortmund was the one club where I left myself kind of open by not reading the transfer mark page with the ages. Somehow I only made one mistake there. I made 30 mistakes for Bayern, but it's neither here nor there.
I think that's pretty symbolic. I don't think anyone's going to fault you for not thinking about that guy.
Yeah.
I think out of all the teams we talk about, this is the one team where you can point to people and say these are genuine starters because they've already have been, right? Schlotterbeck has been starting forever. Reyna, no matter how injured he is and what people have to say, he was a consistent contributor for a little bit.
He matched Messi for chances created for like a 3 month. Well, not matched, but he was like second to Messi for chances created in top 5 leagues when he was 17. So he has talent. It'd probably help him if he played with Holland again, but
Adeyemi, I mean, started in a Champions League, right? I mean, there's not really a whole lot to go against him. Like all of these players you just talked about, it's hard to argue against that. These dudes are going to be starting for a while, if not for Dortmund, but just these are names you're going to be hearing about for a very long time. So this is easily number one for me in terms of quality.
yeah. And even if you look at Duranville, like we talked about a lot of guys that are like the most highly rated U18 prospect. This is the most highly rated like U18 prospect. He was the most highly rated U17 prospect. He was the most highly rated U16 project with with Belgium since I don't know, maybe it was like Yuri Tielemans, who hasn't necessarily panned out, or even probably more apt would be a guy named Eden Hazard. Like this guy has also played like several hundred league minutes in Belgium. At 16, got like I think like a goal, an assist maybe, at least a goal at 16. Has grown considerably from being about 5'5", which will help at the highest levels. Is absolutely rapid, and if he can stay fit, they say his fitness issues are down to growing. Like this guy is genuinely world like class potential. So young. Maxi Bayer coming off 16 goal contributions last season. Nico Schlotterbeck entering the first year of his peak and has been one of like 2 years ago was one of the better defenders in the world, and like I mean like top 20. And last year he's pretty much indisputably top 10. In my opinion, was probably like 1 to 3 range. Very few guys you could argue ahead of him. I think Mats Hummels got more plaudits last year. But again, like if you're talking about consistency, which I think is the most important thing for defenders, Schlotterbeck like obviously picked up the double yellow in the last match, but that's like a bit of a forced yellow in a lot of defending aspects. Like you can talk about Shan's there to slide across and he's going wide, but like if Shan's coming across, like if he gets underneath Shan, then it's a penalty and like Dortmund might lose that game. So I think you're talking about a guy like Mats Hummels last year, like had the moments of inconsistency with some more rash red cards and penalties conceded, which you don't really like. Schlotterbeck didn't really have a lot of that. The only one was like a very controversial handball that shouldn't have been called by a PSG side in the group stages that got about 20 penalty calls. So hard to blame him there. He's honestly, I think, the best player in any position on this list. I think Musiala and Wirtz are the next two guys. But like he's the only one to me who starts in every team in world football.
Yeah, I think he's without a doubt, I mean, the best defender we've talked about today, like with not even a competition.
Yeah, and I think that he's kind of hinted at he wants the new contract. I think it's coming. Dortmund have the money to retain a lot of these guys, and like they have the money, like and proven track record to be able to get the massive fees when they do sell. And you can talk about some of the issues they've had replacing guys they've sold, especially wingers. They did not like they replaced Dembele with Sancho, which did very well, obviously, but they did not replace Sancho. I think the club will be undergoing a bit of turmoil with Vatska leaving, but I think that you've seen a lot better systems implemented this year, and I think Don Sebastian Kale this summer, not hampered by Terzic leaking to the press that they only want Nemecha and he's the only player good enough. Um, like aside from that one instance, I feel like every player we've had, or we've signed under Kale, we've kind of got like a pretty good deal for. I think that like 30 million is on the high end for Guirassy. Um, and like having that like what was initially 15 got it down to about 12 to 13 for his signing bonus is massive, but like I think that there were other clubs willing to pay around that level. So I think he's just like an excellent negotiator. You won't know about this, but when we talk about the academy, I will talk about how he has revolutionized Dortmund's academy. But are we going Dortmund young core top first?
Easily.
Okay, easily. So then let me go straight into how Kale has kind of like revolutionized the academy recruitment. So a little while ago, it was one or two guys from abroad that would be a top prospect like Pulisic, Reyna, Gittins, Sancho. Now it's everyone. And somehow you're still keeping guys like Kale Watson, who's been at the club since he was 12. Or not 12, since he was like 8. Musakaba, 15-year-old, number 6, which is not the most common age for a 15-year-old to be playing U19 football. Those are like typically attacking positions. This guy looks good. He's very highly thought of, clearly. They've not lost a game in regulation with the U19s this year. They've played about 5 or 6, and they're starting about 8 16-year-olds, and they're like leading goal contributors from the U19s last year have all left. That's Paris Brunner. When we were talking about academy stars, that's Krevson, that's Cole Campbell, that's Kale Watson. All these guys have left. You have Filippo Mane, who is a defensive player who's graduated. Hendry Blank has graduated in recent years. Nnamdi Collins, $1 million fee, has not really played much at Frankfurt, but that's $1 million fee out of your academy. Yusufa Mukoko on loan at Nice. Jamie Gittins spent some time with the U19s. Tom Rotha, $5 million fee. He's been good in his one appearance so far for Union and will be looking to start every single game this year. Ansgar Nauf, regular for Eintracht Frankfurt. Osterhage was at Bochum last year, got sold somewhere, and will be a regular there. And Jinma has spent some time in the academy. He just started against us for Werder Bremen. Jan Nicholas Besta got Heidenheim into the Conference League and is now playing Champions League football for, I believe, Benfica randomly. Leonard Maloney spent some time with the U19s in the second team. He's now where? Conference League. Furyk, we're not even above like 25-year-old players. We still have a lot more guys to go. Furyk in the Champions League with Stuttgart. Amos Pieper has been a Bundesliga level player as a center back for 6-7 years now. Since he was about 20. Christian Pulisic, he had double-digit goals, I think, last year for AC Milan. Brun Larsen, not the best player, but he's been a top-flight player for 5-6 years now. Bit part on the bench guy, but still there. Aurel Mangala touched the U19s for about a year on loan from Belgium. He got quoted at, I think he moved this summer for like 30-ish million. Pascal Stenzel was a rotation player for Stuttgart. Atakin Karazor, starter for Stuttgart. Your favorite player, Stefan Tigges, who's not necessarily hit the ground running for Köln, but, 6'5", he's gotten some goals. Another big forward, Marvin Duksch. Kerem Demirbay, who lit it up with Hoffenheim recently and is still playing football. Antonio Rudiger spent some time in the academy. Goetze spent some time in the academy. Jonas Hoffman, Eric Durm, Marcel Holstenberg, Nuri Sahin, Sebastian Kehl, Marco Reus. The list goes on and on. I'm sorry, I know you are not the biggest Tigges fan, but I had to get that in.
Whatever do you mean? I'm not even a Cole fan. Um, yeah, I mean, I from the outside, obviously not super drilled into Dortmund like you are. Like, I don't think I've ever thought the academy was bad. Like, I feel like
Yeah.
Dortmund's always a team where you look at a player in like the Bundesliga specifically or like Austria, and you're like, oh my god, they played for Dortmund. Like what? Like I feel like they're that type of team. And what I was saying earlier about like Bayern's academy, I feel like Bayern's academy historically is better, but I think in the last 15 years,
I'd
like
say 30
well,
because I feel like the Dortmund in terms of impact, like Bayern were like have been that top level club. But I think over the last 30 years, Dortmund's like locally driven academy under Klopp kind of synced up perfectly. So maybe I'd really only say like maybe I guess that is 15 years. Wow, I'm old. I was thinking that was some of that was before me, but no. So yeah, I think you're right. Last 15 years, you have like all that. Maybe it's 20. You have that first generation of guys. Um, in the early 2000s come into the first team under Jurgen Klopp and take that team into the new time period where if you were in the Champions League in the early 2010s, you hit the jackpot and you're now like rich and famous. Um, and then I think you can talk about like long term planning. So Dortmund actually realized something I think like 5, 6 years ago. They were like, we have a lot of very good players coming through the second team. How do we keep them for an extra year to either sell them on or have a little bit longer to evaluate their talent and keep them? And so the only clubs with second teams in the third division right now are Freiburg and Dortmund. Um, Freiburg are really reliant on their second team for like blooding youngsters and like feeding their first team because that's how like they've become so good is through that. And so Dortmund have also done that. And then for the first time, I think the academy recruitment under Kale, like I've made a ton of jokes. You won't know this, but Sebastian Kale, if he sees you cook at a U16 friendly game, like he's on the phone. He's finding out your contract situation. He knows if you're willing to make the move to Germany. Um, so like we just signed the number 10 from Atalanta's U19s. Um, that's one of the best academies in Italy. You know where Pedri came out of the academy? Las Palmas. So we went and got a guy from the Las Palmas Academy, Spanish U16 guy. We were like, oh, Real Madrid wants you. Do you want to play first team football ever? Or do you want to sit behind Vinicius Jr.? And Ousmane Diallo will probably make his Dortmund debut in the next year and a half. This guy is like 5'11", which is a good height for a winger. He absolutely has a three-step burst in terms of his quickness. He's very, very good on the ball. He's had some end product. He's gone straight in the U19s from the U17s last year. And honestly, last year, he probably would have been good enough for 99% of U19 teams in the world. But, you know, he was behind Paris Brunner and Cole Campbell. Cole Campbell and Paris Brunner are both playing senior football this year. We talked about Musa Kaba at 15. And then you look at the center backs. You have Tyler Miser, who like just came in at 16 last year, and kind of has been like the Germany like U17, U18 captain. You have like our fourth U19 center back last year, Elias Benkara, is somehow 6'2" in preseason. He's hitting 40-yard balls to the winger, like dropping it on their foot. Where did this guy come from? It's just because the level of depth in Dortmund's academy is absolutely unreal. Thierry Figeu Tazumeta played in a U16 match for Italy or against Italy for Austria. So he was playing at St. Paulton. Sebastian Kehl was like, I don't know what a St. Paulton is. Call this guy up. He's probably going to come over. And then he was like, oh, who's the captain of the Italy U16 team? Let's bring in Luca Reggiani. Why not? So that's the type of thing he's done. And now you're seeing that after the Dortmund second team has been established and consistently performing in the third division, all of a sudden you drop in like a U19 signing from Holland, and then your five most senior ready U19 players from the previous season. And like that's how you essentially hold on to guys. And then you combine that with like a guy, Julian Hetver, who I've been hyping up for over a year now. We sold Ollie Pullman for 1.6 million. Ollie Pullman was 3 or 4 years older, and only had more goal and assists than Hetver at age 20 last season, because Hetver didn't take penalties and Pullman did. Pullman moving for 1.6 at 23-24, like that's again good. That's a bonus revenue stream that essentially like covers your entire second team like wage bill. And then you have Cole Campbell starting, Almugera Kabar starting, Yannick Lohr's German U20 international starting. Franz Rogau is probably never going to play for Dortmund's second team, but he'll probably get sold to a Bundesliga or Bundesliga 2 side next year for like $2+ million. And then you paid for everyone's salary again. And on your bench, you have Jordi Paulinho, who I think is the Dutch U20 player I just mentioned. Krevson is out of the same academy. I think it's like Shakhtar Donetsk as a £100 million Chelsea player, whatever his name is, Mudryk. This guy had like 15, 20 goal contributions for the U19s last year. He's now with your second team. And the guy we signed from Atalanta has kind of taken over his position with the second team. So that's Samuel Inacio. And then you have Matheus Albert, who isn't Kevon Sullivan level hype, but might be, or is widely considered to be almost as good, if not as good. So you're signing like the top American 15-year-old who's already made his U19 debut, scored, I think, today against the Czech Republic U18s. He's 15 years old, and I don't know if you've been a freshman in high school, but there are not many freshmen in high schools that are playing like senior sports, let alone doing so at the international level.
I agree. Yeah,
and I think this also goes into like Dortmund's academy. The main point here was the Dortmund's academy planning. Like, it's so long term that this plan like took 4 to 5 years to kind of enact, because you had to get the second team into the third division, and then modernize your U19 recruitment, and then you can enact it.
Yeah, I mean, they are not just the best academy in Germany, they are one of the best in the world. And they would have to intentionally dismantle it for it to get to a level that is not good.
Yeah, and I think that over the last like 5-6 years, we've definitely fallen off. But I think that now with Kale having taken over as the director of football and implementing that vision that I just kind of talked about, I think that's all back. And I think now that you have a coach in Nuri Sahin who believes in 60th minute substitutions and 75th minute substitutions, that's how you're going to be able to get a lot of these guys into games. You're not going to see it in the first couple weeks of the season, because as soon as an injury comes to any attacker, all of a sudden Campbell's with the first team. Injury to a defender, all of a sudden Almugera Kabar's with the first team. Filippo Mane will be with the first team again because of a red card. Was with the first team last week because Koto was having like a muscle issue. And that's when you start to see these guys get blooded. So if Dortmund turn over Heidenheim next week, which is not an easy feat, you're going to see Filippo Mane make his Bundesliga debut. And like that's another one. And he's been talked about as like the most, like he's one of the reasons that Dortmund kind of let a lot of these guys walk, is because like last year we sold Hendry Blank for $7.5 million, and people were like, why? He's our fourth best center back at the club. Like our only fourth best center back at the club right now is Papadopoulos, and it's because as soon as Filippo Mane was fit, which is his issue right now, he's the fourth center back at the club, and Hendry Blake wasn't. And Hendry Blake looked senior ready, and he'll probably be at Leipzig in a couple of years, and Dortmund will reap the benefits of the sell-on clause in there, or buy him back and sell him or loan him somewhere else. You can talk about some of the issues this summer, but again, that's a lot of that I think is down to Edin Terzic playing defensive football, and I talked about that enough. This has been a long recording. Dortmund Academy, where do you want him?
One. I changed what I say before. I actually, while you're doing that, I looked up how many people in like the last few years have had 100 league appearances for a Bayern Academy, and it is shockingly low. So I don't even have to look up Dortmund to know they blow them out of the water in aspects.
Yeah, I think Bayern have had more guys that like touch the first league, or are in first league squads, but in terms of
like starting,
yeah,
Dortmund's got to be better. So
yeah, in terms of the quality, like we just talked about so many Champions League guys, and I was looking for them for so many of these clubs, and I'm just not even finding like Bundesliga like guys that our listeners would know. Well, thank you for coming and taking like 2 hours out of your Friday night to come and talk about some football with us. Is there anything you want to plug before you go?
I guess just 50 Plus Donor Show. We allegedly have a Dortmund co-host, but we are, of course, I'm not going to keep beating that one to death. We're a show every Thursday on Twitch and YouTube, and we do watch-alongs every now and then. I think we might actually do Dortmund Heidenheim, so come through. We're on Twitter, Threads, and all that other stuff.
Yeah, highly recommend following. Great follow. Some of the better Bundesliga memes you will see. And thank you all for joining us. You can find us everywhere at Dortmund Dispatch, all podcast platforms, and now YouTube. I bought a Wi-Fi mesh system, so we should have regular YouTube uploads from here on out. And thank you for all of your support, and have a good one.